was buried to her neck for being barren, saved by a widowed cowboy who took her home. The sun blazed mercilessly over the Oklahoma Territory as dust swirled across the barren plains. A woman's head protruded from the hard-packed earth, her face streaked with dirt and tears, lips cracked and bleeding from 2 days without water. Her name was Claire Morrison, and her own husband had buried her there as punishment for failing to bear him children. The townspeople had watched, some with pity, most with cold indifference, as he shoveled dirt around her body until only her head remained visible. They called it frontier justice, a warning to women who couldn't fulfill their duties. Claire's vision blurred as the afternoon heat intensified. Vultures circled overhead, their shadows crossing her face like dark prophecies. She had stopped screaming hours ago, her voice reduced to barely a whisper. Her husband, Vernon Morrison, had ridden back to their homestead, leaving her to die slowly under the unforgiving sky. The few travelers who passed on the distant road turned their heads away, unwilling to interfere in what they considered a domestic matter. Jake Coleman rode his gray mare along the ridge, scanning the horizon for stray cattle. He was a widowed rancher, 42 years old, with weathered hands and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. His wife Margaret had died 3 winters past from fever, leaving him alone on their modest ranch. He kept to himself mostly, tending his herd and fixing what needed fixing, finding solace in the simple rhythm of ranch work. Something caught his eye in the valley below. At first he thought it was a rock formation, but as he rode closer, his stomach turned. A human head, a woman's head, emerging from the ground like some terrible nightmare. Jake spurred his horse forward, his heart pounding as he recognized the signs of a burial punishment. He had heard of such things, but never witnessed one himself. He dismounted quickly, dropping to his knees beside Claire. Her eyes flickered open, barely focusing on his face. "Hold on," Jake said, his voice rough with urgency. "I'm getting you out." He grabbed his shovel from his saddle pack and began digging frantically around her buried body. The earth was packed tight, baked hard by the sun. Sweat poured down his face as he worked, muscles straining with each thrust of the shovel. Claire tried to speak, but only a weak croak emerged. Jake pulled his canteen and carefully tilted water to her lips. "Easy now, small sips," he instructed. She drank desperately, water spilling down her chin. After several minutes of digging, Jake had loosened enough dirt to begin pulling her free. He gripped her shoulders and tugged gently, then harder, until her body slid from its earthen prison. She collapsed into his arms, her legs too weak to support her weight. Her dress was torn and filthy, her skin scraped raw in places where the rocks had cut into her flesh. Jake wrapped his jacket around her shoulders despite the heat, a gesture of dignity more than warmth. "Who did this to you?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "My husband," Claire whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Vernon Morrison. Said I was worthless, barren, not fit to be his wife." Fresh tears cut tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. "He said if God wouldn't take me, the desert would." Jake's jaw tightened with anger. He had known Vernon Morrison by reputation, a cruel man who drank too much and had a violent temper. The fact that no one had stopped this atrocity spoke volumes about the fear Morrison commanded in the territory. Jake helped Claire onto his horse, then mounted behind her, holding her steady as they began the slow ride to his ranch. The journey took nearly 2 hours. Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. Jake kept one arm around her waist, supporting her weight against his chest. He spoke to her occasionally, keeping her tethered to the waking world with his steady voice. "Almost there now. Got a well with cold water. Clean bed. You'll be safe." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jake's ranch came into view. It wasn't much, just a small house, a barn, and a few outbuildings surrounded by fenced pastures, but it was solid and well-maintained, a testament to Jake's dedication. He rode straight to the house, carefully lifting Claire down from the saddle. She had fallen completely unconscious now, her body limp in his arms. Jake kicked open the front door and carried her inside, laying her gently on his bed. The room was sparse but clean, with simple furniture and few personal items. He fetched water and clean cloths, then hesitated. It wouldn't be proper for him to undress her, even in her condition, but she needed medical attention. He settled for cleaning her face and arms, removing the worst of the dirt and checking for serious injuries. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Jake pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, watching over her as darkness fell outside. He knew there would be consequences for what he had done. Vernon Morrison wouldn't take kindly to someone interfering with his punishment, but Jake had lost too much in his life to stand by and watch another person suffer when he could prevent it. Whatever came next, he would face it standing upright, with his conscience clear. The next morning arrived with soft golden light filtering through the bedroom window. Claire's eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The ceiling above her was made of rough-hewn timber, and the bed beneath her felt impossibly soft after 2 days pressed against the hard earth. She turned her head and saw Jake sitting in a chair nearby, his head tilted back in sleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Memory crashed over her like a wave, and she gasped, her hand instinctively moving to her throat. The sound woke Jake immediately. He sat forward, rubbing his eyes. "You're awake," he said, relief evident in his voice. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses," Claire admitted, her voice still raspy. She tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her shoulders and back. Jake stood quickly, helping her adjust the pillows behind her. "Where am I?" "My ranch. About 15 miles south of where I found you," Jake explained. He poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. "Name's Jake Coleman. Drink slow. Your stomach needs time to adjust." Claire took the cup with trembling hands, sipping carefully. The water was cool and clean, tasting like salvation. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life. I thought I was going to die out there." "Nobody deserves what was done to you," Jake said firmly. "I don't care what the reason was, it was wrong." He moved to the window, looking out across his land. "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you again." "Vernon will come looking for me," Claire said, fear creeping into her voice. "When he finds out someone pulled me out, he'll be furious. He's not a man who forgives easily." Jake turned back to face her, his expression hard as granite. "Let him come. This is my land, and I protect what's mine. You're under my roof now, which means you're under my protection too." Claire studied him carefully, this stranger who had risked himself to save her. He had kind eyes, despite the hardness of his features, and his voice carried genuine conviction. She had spent 5 years married to Vernon, learning to read men's intentions through their smallest gestures. Jake Coleman seemed different from any man she had known. There was no cruelty in him, no hidden malice waiting to surface. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted quietly. "My family disowned me when I married Vernon. They said I was making a mistake, but I wouldn't listen. I thought he loved me." She laughed bitterly. "I was so young and stupid." "You are hopeful," Jake corrected. "That's not the same as stupid, and you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. I could use help around the ranch anyway. Place has been falling apart since Margaret died." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "My wife, 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," Claire said softly. The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. She could see the grief still lived in him, buried deep but never fully healed. Jake nodded his thanks. "I'll make you some breakfast. You need to eat, build your strength back up. There's a wash basin and clean clothes in the chest over there." They were Margaret's. She'd want them used rather than sitting in storage. He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Claire, I need to know, do you want me to inform the marshal about what happened to you?" Claire considered the question carefully. The marshal was a friend of Vernon's, played cards with him every Friday night at the saloon. "No," she said finally. "It wouldn't do any good. They'd say it was Vernon's right as my husband. The law doesn't protect women like me." "The law's a broken thing," Jake agreed. "But there are other kinds of justice in this world. You rest now. We'll figure things out as we go." He left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Claire sat alone in the peaceful silence, hardly daring to believe her circumstances had changed so dramatically. 24 hours ago, she had been certain she would die in that terrible hole. Now she was clean and safe, with a roof over her head and a protector she barely knew but somehow trusted. She rose slowly from the bed, her muscles screaming in protest. Every movement hurt, but she forced herself to stand. At the wash basin, she caught sight of her reflection in a small mirror hanging on the wall. She barely recognized herself. Her face was gaunt and sunburned, her hair matted with dirt and sweat. Bruises colored her neck and shoulders where Vernon had grabbed her during the burial. Claire stripped off her ruined dress and washed herself carefully, wincing as the cloth passed over her injuries. The water in the basin turned brown with dirt. She found a simple cotton dress in Margaret's chest, plain but well made, and pulled it on. It fit reasonably well, though Margaret had been slightly taller. She braided her damp hair, tying it with a ribbon she found in the chest. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Jake in the kitchen, stirring something over the stove. The smell of cooking food made her stomach clench with hunger. "Bacon and eggs," Jake said without turning around. "Nothing fancy, but it's filling." Claire sat at the rough wooden table, looking around the small house. It was tidy despite lacking a woman's touch, everything in its proper place. You keep a clean home, she observed. Learn to take care of myself, Jake replied. He brought 2 plates to the table and sat across from her. Living alone teaches you that quick. They ate in companionable silence for several minutes. The food was simple but delicious, and Claire found herself eating faster than she should, her body desperate for nourishment. Slow down, Jake warned gently. Don't want you getting sick. Claire forced herself to take smaller bites, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. When they finished, Jake cleared the plates and poured coffee from a battered pot. I need to check on my cattle today, make sure the fence lines are holding. You should rest, but if you feel up to it, there's mending that needs doing. Needle and thread in the drawer there. I can help, Claire said quickly. She needed to feel useful, needed to contribute something in exchange for Jake's kindness. I'm good with mending, and cooking too, if you'll let me. Jake nodded slowly. All right then, but don't push yourself too hard. Your body needs time to heal. He finished his coffee and stood, placing his hat on his head. I'll be back before dark. If anyone comes to the house, don't answer the door. There's a rifle above the mantel loaded. You know how to use one? Vernon taught me, Claire said. He wanted me to be able to protect the house when he was away. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Vernon had armed his wife to protect their home, never imagining she might one day need protection from him. Good, Jake said. Hopefully you won't need it, but better to be prepared. He started toward the door, then paused. Claire, you did nothing wrong. Whatever Vernon told you, whatever the town believes, you're not worthless. No woman is. Remember that. His words struck something deep inside her, and Claire felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't realized how desperately she needed to hear those words until they were spoken. Thank you, she managed to say. Jake tipped his hat and left, the door closing softly behind him. Through the window, Claire watched him saddle his horse and ride off toward the western pastures. She sat alone in the quiet house, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, maybe something she had never truly felt before. The day passed slowly as Claire moved through the house, familiarizing herself with its layout and rhythms. She found the mending basket and set to work on a pile of shirts with torn seams and missing buttons. Her fingers moved automatically through the familiar motions, needle pulling thread in neat, precise stitches. The work was meditative, giving her mind time to process everything that had happened. As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the ranch, Claire heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart seized with sudden fear. She set down her mending and moved quickly to the window, peering out carefully. 3 riders were coming up the road, and even at a distance, she recognized the lead horse. Vernon's big black stallion. Her husband had come looking for her. Claire's hand shook as she reached for the rifle above the mantel. She checked the chamber, confirming it was loaded, then positioned herself away from the windows where she could see the front door. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Heavy boots hit the porch boards. Claire! Vernon's voice boomed through the door, slurred with alcohol. I know you're in there. Some busybody rancher pulled you out, and folks saw him bring you this way. Open this door right now, woman. You're coming home. Claire said nothing, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. I'm giving you to the count of 3, Vernon continued. Then I'm coming in whether you like it or not. 1. Claire raised the rifle, aiming at the door. 2. She heard Vernon's companions shifting nervously on the porch. One of them muttered something about this being a bad idea. 3. The door exploded inward as Vernon's boot connected with the wood. He stumbled into the house, his 2 friends hanging back on the porch. Vernon's eyes were bloodshot, his clothes stained with whiskey. When he saw Claire standing there with the rifle pointed at his chest, he stopped short. Put that down before you hurt yourself, he sneered. You don't have the spine to pull that trigger. Wouldn't bet on that. Jake's voice rang out from behind Vernon. The widowed rancher had returned early, alerted by neighbors who had seen Vernon and his men heading toward his property. He stood in the doorway with his own rifle leveled at Vernon's back. You're trespassing on my land, Morrison. And you broke my door. Vernon spun around, rage contorting his features. This is none of your business, Coleman. That's my wife. I got every right to take her back. You lost that right when you buried her alive, Jake said coldly. Now you got 2 choices. You can leave peacefully, or I can shoot you for breaking into my home. Wyoming law is pretty clear on a man's right to defend his property. She's my property, Vernon snarled. She's a human being, Jake corrected. And she's staying here. Now get off my land before I forget my Christian upbringing and put a bullet in you anyway. For a long moment, Vernon stood frozen between Claire's rifle and Jake's. His friends on the porch were already backing away, unwilling to die for Vernon's pride. Finally, Vernon spat on the floor and shouldered past Jake. "This ain't over," he threatened. "I'll be back with the marshal. He'll straighten this out proper." "You do that," Jake said, "and while you're at it, you can explain to him why you buried your wife alive. Pretty sure there's laws against attempted murder, even for husbands." Vernon's face purpled with fury, but he knew he was beaten, at least for now. He stomped off the porch and mounted his horse, yanking the reins viciously. His companions followed, and the three men rode away in a cloud of dust. Jake lowered his rifle and turned to Claire, who still stood with her weapon raised, her whole body trembling. "You can put that down now," he said gently. "They're gone." Claire lowered the rifle slowly, then her legs gave out. Jake caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to a chair. "I've got you," he murmured. "You're safe. You did good standing your ground like that." "He'll come back," Claire said, her voice hollow. "You heard him. He'll bring the marshal. Maybe more men. You shouldn't have gotten involved in this, Jake. Vernon will destroy you for helping me." Jake knelt beside her chair, meeting her eyes directly. "Let me tell you something about men like Vernon Morrison. They only have power because decent folks stand by and let them have it. They count on people being too scared to stand up. Well, I'm not scared of him, and I'm not letting him take you back to a life where he can hurt you." "But why?" Claire asked desperately. "Why would you risk everything for someone you don't even know?" Jake was quiet for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "When Margaret got sick, I rode through a blizzard to fetch the doctor. Damn near killed my horse getting there. The doctor wouldn't come. Said the storm was too dangerous, that Margaret probably wouldn't make it anyway, so why risk his life? I begged him, offered him everything I had, but he refused." Jake's voice grew heavy with old pain. "I rode back alone and held Margaret while she died. For 3 years I've wondered what I could have done different. But I know one thing for certain. I never want to be the person who has the power to help someone and chooses not to. I never want to be that doctor." Claire understood then. Jake wasn't just saving her. He was saving himself from becoming someone he couldn't live with. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being a better man than most. I'm just doing what's right," Jake said, standing up. "Now let's get that door fixed before all the heat escapes. And tomorrow, we need to make a plan. Vernon might be stupid, but he's not going to give up. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." As Jake set about repairing the broken door, Claire watched him work, feeling something shift inside her. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her life wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. The next morning arrived with frost covering the ground, autumn asserting its presence across the Wyoming territory. Claire woke early, finding Jake already up and working in the barn. She prepared breakfast, moving through the kitchen with growing confidence. The simple act of cooking in a peaceful home felt like a luxury she had forgotten existed. Over breakfast, Jake laid out his thoughts. "I've been thinking about our situation. Vernon's going to push this, probably try to turn the town against us. We need allies, people who will stand with us if things get ugly." He paused, stirring his coffee. "There's a woman in town, Martha Jenkins. She runs the boarding house and doesn't take kindly to bullies. Lost her own husband to a violent man years back. I think she might help us." "Help us how?" Claire asked. She had learned during her marriage to Vernon that most people preferred to look the other way rather than get involved in domestic troubles. "Witness testimony, for one thing," Jake explained. "If Vernon tries to claim you left willingly or that I kidnapped you, we need someone respectable to vouch for what really happened. Martha knows everyone in town. She hears things. If anyone knows about Vernon's reputation, it's her." Claire nodded slowly. "All right. When do we go?" "This afternoon. I've got morning chores to finish first." Jake studied her across the table. "You sure you're ready to face people? Town's gonna talk, you staying out here with me. Folks have small minds and smaller hearts sometimes." "Let them talk," Claire said, with more bravery than she felt. "I'd rather deal with gossip than be dead in the ground." They rode into town just after noon, Claire seated behind Jake on his gray mare. The main street of Cottonwood Falls consisted of about 20 buildings, including 2 saloons, a general store, a church, the marshal's office, and Martha's boarding house. As they passed through town, Claire felt eyes following them, conversations stopping mid-sentence, heads turning to track their progress. Jake hitched his horse outside the boarding house, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and clean windows. Before they could knock, the door swung open to reveal a stout woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and sharp blue eyes. Martha Jenkins took one look at Claire and stepped aside. "Get in here before the whole town gathers to gawk." Inside, the boarding house smelled of fresh bread and soap. Martha led them to a private sitting room and closed the door firmly. "I heard what Vernon did to you," she said bluntly, addressing Claire. "Jake here pulled you out. Also heard Vernon came calling yesterday with 2 of his drinking buddies." "News travels fast," Jake observed. "News travels at exactly the speed of gossip, which is faster than telegraph," Martha replied. She turned her full attention to Claire, her expression softening slightly. "How are you holding up, girl?" The unexpected kindness nearly undid Claire's composure. "I'm alive, thanks to Jake. But Vernon's not going to let this go." "No, he won't," Martha agreed. She poured 3 cups of tea from a pot on the sideboard and handed them around. "Vernon Morrison's had this town cowed for too long. He drinks, he fights, and he thinks his money gives him the right to do whatever he pleases. Well, some of us are tired of it." Jake leaned forward. "Martha, we need help. Vernon's probably working on the marshal right now, trying to twist this situation to his advantage. Claire needs people who'll tell the truth about what happened." Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. "The marshal's a weak man, but he's not entirely corrupt. Problem is, the law's murky on issues between husbands and wives. Vernon could argue he was exercising his rights as a husband, claim Claire was disobedient or unfaithful or whatever lie suits him. Unless we can prove what he did was attempted murder, the law might side with him." "I have proof," Claire said quietly. Both Jake and Martha looked at her in surprise. "My back and shoulders, they're covered in bruises and cuts from where he dragged me and forced me into that hole. Vernon's hands left marks on my throat. Any doctor could confirm those injuries are consistent with what I'm claiming." Martha's eyes gleamed with approval. "Smart girl. Doc Harrison's honest mostly. Drinks a bit too much, but he won't lie in an official capacity. We get him to document your injuries, that's evidence that could stand up even in a biased court." She stood decisively. "Come on. We're going to see the doc right now, all 3 of us. Jake, you'll be a witness. I'll make sure Doc writes everything down proper." They left the boarding house through the back door, avoiding the main street. Doc Harrison's office sat on the edge of town, a small building attached to his home. Martha knocked firmly, not waiting for an invitation before pushing inside. The doctor, a thin man with wispy hair and tired eyes, looked up from his desk in surprise. "Martha, what's this about?" "I'm expecting a patient in 20 minutes. "This is your patient," Martha said, pulling Claire forward. "This is Claire Morrison. You've probably heard by now what her husband did to her. We need you to examine her injuries and provide written documentation for legal purposes." Doc Harrison's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to concern. He gestured toward the examination room. "All right, then. Mrs. Morrison, if you'll come with me. Martha, you can accompany her for propriety. Mr. Coleman, you'll wait here. The examination took nearly half an hour." When Claire and Martha emerged, Claire looked pale but resolute. Doc Harrison followed, carrying a sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "I've documented extensive bruising, lacerations, and contusions consistent with physical assault and prolonged restraint," he said formally. "I've also noted signs of dehydration and exposure. In my medical opinion, these injuries support a claim of attempted murder, or at minimum, severe assault with intent to cause grievous harm." Jake took the document carefully, folding it and placing it inside his jacket. "Thank you, Doc. I know this puts you in a difficult position. The only difficult position is living with yourself when you know you could have helped someone and didn't," Doc Harrison said, echoing Jake's own philosophy. "Vernon Morrison's done enough damage in this town. If this helps stop him, then I've done my duty." They left the doctor's office and headed back toward Martha's boarding house, but as they rounded the corner onto Main Street, they found their path blocked. Vernon Morrison stood in the middle of the street, flanked by 4 men. The marshal stood slightly apart, looking uncomfortable but present. "There they are," Vernon called out loudly, addressing the growing crowd of onlookers. "That's the man who broke into my home and kidnapped my wife, and there's the unfaithful woman who ran off with him." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his hip, but he wasn't wearing his gun. He had deliberately left it behind, knowing that bringing a weapon into town would only escalate tensions. Now he regretted that decision. "Nobody kidnapped anyone," Martha spoke up, her voice carrying across the street. "Jake Coleman saved that girl's life after you buried her alive. Vernon Morrison, and everyone here knows it." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Vernon's version of events had apparently differed from the truth that most folks had heard through the gossip network. "That's a damned lie," Vernon snarled. "I was teaching my wife a lesson about obedience, which is my right. She's supposed to honor and obey me. It says so in the Bible. The Bible also says thou shalt not murder," Jake called back. What you did to Claire was attempted murder, plain and simple. We've got a doctor's testimony to prove it." Vernon's face darkened with rage. He took a step forward, and his 4 companions moved with him. The marshal finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. "Now hold on, everyone. This needs to be settled properly. Through the law." "The law gives a husband rights over his wife," Vernon argued. "She's my property, bought and paid for when I married her. I want her returned to me, and I want Coleman arrested for theft and trespassing." "A woman's not property," Martha declared. Several women in the crowd nodded in agreement, though their husbands looked less certain. "And what you did to Claire Morrison was barbaric, Vernon. You should be the one getting arrested." The marshal looked between the 2 groups, clearly out of his depth. "I think we all need to calm down and discuss this in my office, private-like." "Nothing private about it," Jake said firmly. "This town needs to decide what kind of place it wants to be. The kind where men can bury their wives alive and face no consequences? Or the kind where people stand up for what's right, even when it's hard?" The crowd had swelled to nearly 50 people now, drawn by the commotion. Jake saw faces he recognized, neighbors and fellow ranchers, shopkeepers, and their wives. Some looked sympathetic, others disapproving. Most just looked uncertain, waiting to see which way the wind would blow. And a voice rang out from the crowd, wavering but determined. "Vernon Morrison beat my sister near to death 10 years ago." Everyone turned to see an elderly woman stepping forward, clutching her shawl. She was his first wife, before Claire. Beat her so bad she couldn't have children after. She died young, broken in spirit and body. I never spoke up because I was scared, but I'm speaking now. Vernon Morrison's a violent man, and everyone here knows it. The admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. Other voices began to rise, people sharing their own experiences with Vernon's temper, his cruelty, his drinking. The tide was turning, and Vernon could feel it. His face purpled with fury, and his hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Nobody talks about me like that," he growled. In one fluid motion, he drew his pistol and aimed it at Jake. Time seemed to slow down. Claire screamed. Martha moved to shield her. The crowd scattered, and Jake stood his ground, staring down the barrel of Vernon's gun. "Go ahead," Jake said quietly. "Shoot an unarmed man in front of 50 witnesses. See how far that gets you." Vernon's finger tightened on the trigger. For a heartbeat, death hung in the balance. Then the marshal found his courage. He drew his own weapon and pointed it at Vernon. "Put it down, Morrison. I can't let you commit murder in broad daylight. This has gone far enough." Vernon's eyes darted between Jake and the marshal, calculating his options. Finally, with a roar of frustration, he lowered his gun. "This isn't over," he spat. "Not by a long shot." He shoved through the crowd, his companions following. They mounted their horses and rode out of town, Vernon's curses echoing behind them. The tension broke like a snapped rope. The people began talking all at once, some approaching Jake and Claire with words of support, others hurrying away as if distance could protect them from the consequences of what they had witnessed. The marshal holstered his weapon and approached Jake, looking tired. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Coleman. Vernon's not going to let this go. He'll brood on it, get drunk, and come back meaner than ever. Then I'll be ready," Jake said. "In the meantime, what about Claire? Can you protect her from her husband?" The marshal sighed. "Law's fuzzy on that. Technically, she's still his wife. But given what happened here today and with Doc Harrison's testimony, I can probably keep Vernon from forcing her to go back with him, at least temporarily. But Coleman, you need to understand. This could get ugly. Vernon's got friends, men who owe him money or favors. He could come at you with a dozen guns." "Let him try," Jake said. He felt Claire's hand slip into his, seeking reassurance. He squeezed her fingers gently. "We're not backing down." Martha approached, her face grim but determined. "You'll need help. I'll spread the word among folks who've had enough of Vernon's tyranny. There's more of us than you might think. We'll organize, keep watch on Jake's ranch, make sure you two aren't alone if Vernon comes calling again." Over the next several days, something remarkable happened. People began showing up at Jake's ranch. First came Samuel Cooper, an older rancher whose daughter Vernon had harassed years ago. He brought his 2 sons, both strong young men with rifles. Then came the widow Patterson, who set up camp in Jake's kitchen and began cooking for everyone, insisting that an army traveled on its stomach. More people arrived, some bringing supplies, others offering to take shifts watching the roads. Jake's modest ranch transformed into a small fort. Men patrolled the property lines, women helped Claire with chores and offered her friendship, and children played in the yard, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the underlying tension. Claire found herself surrounded by support she had never expected, people who had lived in fear of Vernon for years finally finding the courage to stand together. Martha organized everything with military precision. She created watch schedules, coordinated food preparation, and even set up a communication system using mirrors to signal between lookout posts. "We've been pushed around long enough," she declared. "Vernon Morrison's going to learn that this town's backbone isn't as soft as he thought." Claire worked alongside the women, grateful for their company. Many shared their own stories of abuse, of brothers or fathers or husbands who had used their strength to control rather than protect. She realized she wasn't alone, had never been alone, even when she felt most isolated. The women of Cottonwood Falls had been suffering in silence, waiting for someone to be the first to stand up. "You did something important," Sarah Mitchell told her one evening as they prepared dinner. Sarah was a quiet woman with sad eyes and a limp from an old injury. "You survived. And you let people see what Vernon really is. That takes courage." "I didn't do anything courageous," Claire protested. "I just didn't want to die. Sometimes survival is the most courageous act of all," Sarah said wisely. Jake watched all of this with a mixture of pride and concern. He was glad to see the community rallying, but he knew Vernon hadn't given up. Men like that never did. They stewed in their anger until it boiled over into violence. The question wasn't if Vernon would attack, but when and how. The answer came on a moonless night 2 weeks after the confrontation in town. Jake was on watch in the north pasture when he saw them coming. Riders, at least 8 of them, approaching from different directions in a coordinated attack. They carried torches, bright flames cutting through the darkness. Vernon's voice carried across the night air, slurred with whiskey and rage. "Come out, Coleman. Come out and face me like a man. I'm taking back what's mine." Jake fired a warning shot into the air, the sound echoing across the ranch. Within seconds, his makeshift army responded. Men emerged from the barn, the bunkhouse, the house itself, all carrying weapons. Women gathered the children and herded them into the root cellar, then took up positions at the windows with rifles of their own. The ranch transformed from a sleeping homestead into a fortress in moments. Vernon and his men stopped at the property line, perhaps surprised by the show of force. His torch illuminated his face, twisted with hatred and alcohol. "This is your last chance, Coleman. Send out my wife, and the rest of you can go home. Nobody else has to get hurt." "The only person leaving hurt tonight is you if you don't turn around," Jake called back. He stood on his porch, rifle in hand, surrounded by determined men and women who had chosen to stand with him. "Claire's under my protection, and she's not going anywhere." "She's my wife," Vernon roared. "She was your victim," Jake corrected. "But not anymore. Now ride away before this gets worse for you." Vernon's response was to raise his pistol and fire. The bullet went wild, but it was all the provocation Jake's defenders needed. Rifles cracked from multiple positions, not aimed to kill, but to intimidate. Bullets kicked up dirt around the hooves of Vernon's horses. The animals panicked, rearing and bucking. Several of Vernon's men lost their nerve immediately, wheeling their horses and fleeing into the darkness. Vernon fought to control his stallion, screaming curses. He fired again, this time more carefully aimed. His bullet struck the porch rail inches from Jake's head. Jake raised his rifle and fired back, deliberately shooting high. The message was clear. If Jake had wanted to kill Vernon, he could have. "Next time I won't miss," Jake warned. "This is your final chance to leave peacefully." For a long moment, Vernon sat on his dancing horse, torch in one hand, gun in the other, violence and pride warring in his expression. Then the marshal appeared, riding up fast with 2 deputies. "Drop your weapons," the marshal ordered. "All of you, now." Vernon stared at the marshal in betrayal. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of the law," the marshal said, surprising everyone. "And what you're doing here is attempted assault, possibly attempted murder. Drop your gun, Morrison, or I'll arrest you right here and now." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Vernon threw his torch to the ground, where it sputtered in the dirt. "You're all against me," he said, his voice breaking. "My own town, my own friends, my own wife. Everyone's against me." "You did this to yourself, Vernon," Jake said, lowering his rifle. "You had chances to be a better man. You chose this path." Vernon's shoulders slumped. For a moment he looked less like a monster and more like a broken man who had lost everything through his own cruelty. Then his face hardened again. "I'll never give her a divorce," he said venomously. "She'll be tied to me until one of us dies. She'll never truly be free." With that parting shot, he turned his horse and rode away into the darkness, his remaining companions following. The marshal watched him go, then turned to Jake. "I'll try to bring charges, but I'm not hopeful. Best I can probably do is get a court order keeping him away from your property. It's not much, but it's something. It's enough, Jake said. Thank you for coming when you did. The marshal nodded wearily. Didn't have much choice. Martha Jenkins came to my office and told me exactly what would happen if I didn't do my duty. That woman's scarier than Vernon Morrison ever was. Despite the tension, several people laughed. As the marshal and his deputies rode away, the defenders began to stand down. The immediate danger had passed, though everyone knew the larger conflict was far from over. People gathered in Jake's yard, sharing coffee and nervous laughter, the relief palpable. Claire found Jake by the barn, checking on his horses who had been spooked by the gunfire. She stood beside him silently for a moment, both of them processing what had just happened. Thank you, she finally said, for everything. For saving me, for protecting me, for giving me a chance at a reallife.com. You don't need to thank me, Jake said. We did what was right. No, Claire corrected gently. You did what was right. The rest of the town followed your example. You showed them that standing up to bullies was possible. She paused, gathering her courage. Jake, I know this started as just you helping someone in trouble, but it's become more than that, hasn't it? All these people coming together, finding their strength. You started something important here. Jake turned to face her, seeing her clearly in the lamplight from the barn. She looked different from the half-dead woman he had pulled from the ground weeks ago. Stronger, more alive. What happens now? He asked. Vernon was right about one thing. As long as you're married to him, you'll never truly be free. There are ways to end a marriage, Claire said carefully. Abandonment, cruelty, there are grounds for annulment or divorce if we can prove them. It'll take time, maybe years, but Martha knows a lawyer in Cheyenne who handles such things. G's already sent word. And in the meantime? Jake asked. Claire met his eyes directly. In the meantime, I stay here, if you'll have me. I work the ranch, earn my keep, and we figure things out as we go. Together. The word hung between them, laden with possibility. Together. Not rescuer and victim, not protector and protected, but partners facing an uncertain future. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a wall he had built after Margaret's death beginning to crack. Together sounds good, he said softly. It sounds real good. The next months were challenging but productive. True to the marshal's word, a court order was issued forbidding Vernon from approaching Jake's property or attempting contact with Claire. Vernon largely obeyed, though he made his displeasure known by refusing to sell supplies to anyone who had supported Jake during the standoff. This backfired when Martha organized an alternative supply network bringing goods from neighboring towns and selling them at fair prices, undermining Vernon's attempt at economic warfare. Claire and Jake fell into an easy partnership. She proved to be an excellent ranch hand, not afraid of hard work or long hours. They worked side by side, repairing fences, tending cattle, preparing for the coming winter. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Slowly, tentatively, something deeper than friendship began to grow between them. The women of the town had not forgotten Claire. They invited her to quilting circles and church socials, including her in their community despite the scandal of her living arrangement with Jake. Some of the more conservative townspeople disapproved, but they were increasingly in the minority. Claire had become a symbol of resistance against domestic tyranny, and most people respected her for her courage. Winter arrived with bitter cold and deep snow. Jake and Claire worked together to keep the ranch running, their breath misting in the frozen air as they fed livestock and broke ice on water troughs. The isolation of winter actually brought them closer. Long evenings spent by the fire, comfortable silences interrupted by conversation and occasional laughter. One evening in late January, as snow fell softly outside, Jake cleared his throat nervously. Claire, I need to talk to you about something. She looked up from the shirt she was mending, concerned by his serious tone. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, exactly. Jake struggled for words, something that didn't come naturally to him. I've been thinking. This arrangement we have, it's working well. The ranch is in better shape than it's been in years. We work well together. And I've come to realize that I've come to care for you, more than just as a friend or partner. Claire set down her mending, her heart beginning to race. Jake, let me finish, she said quickly. I know you're still technically married to Vernon. I know it's complicated. But when your divorce comes through, if it comes through, I want you to know that I'd be honored if you'd consider staying here permanently. As my wife, I mean. If you'd want that. If you could see me that way. Tears sprang to Claire's eyes, but they were happy tears. Jake Coleman, I've been hoping you'd say something like that for months now. Yes, when I'm free, yes, I would be honored to be your wife. Jake's weathered face broke into a smile that transformed his serious features. He crossed the room and took her hands in his. "We'll do it right," he promised. "Legal and proper. But I wanted you to know that you have a home here. Always. No matter what happens with the divorce." "I already knew that," Claire said softly. "I think I've known it since the day you pulled me from the ground and refused to let me die." "You gave me back my life, Jake. You gave me back myself." They sat together by the fire, hands clasped, watching the flames dance. Outside, the wind howled across the Wyoming prairie, but inside Jake's house, there was warmth and hope and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine months before. Spring came eventually, as it always does. The snow melted, revealing new grass beneath. Claire's lawyer in Cheyenne sent word that he had successfully filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. Vernon would have to respond to the petition. If he contested it, there would be a trial. If he didn't, the divorce would be granted by default. To everyone's surprise, Vernon didn't contest. Word came that he had left Cottonwood Falls entirely, moved south to Colorado Territory where his reputation hadn't preceded him. Some said he had taken up with another woman. Others claimed he had simply given up, broken by the loss of his power and status in town. Either way, he signed the divorce papers and sent them back without comment. 6 months after Jake pulled Claire from the ground, she was legally free. The divorce decree arrived on a sunny morning in May. Claire held the papers in her trembling hands, hardly believing they were real. "It's over," she whispered. "I'm actually free." Jake wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You've been free since the day you decided to fight back," he said. "This is just the law catching up to what your heart already knew." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Martha stood as witness, along with Samuel Cooper and his sons. Most of the town attended, packing the small building to capacity. Claire wore a new dress that the women of town had made for her as a wedding gift, pale blue with white lace. Jake wore his only suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Claire thought about how far she had come. From a woman buried alive, left to die in the dirt, to a woman standing freely in a church, choosing her own future. The journey had been terrifying and painful, but it had also revealed strength she hadn't known she possessed. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Jake kissed her gently and the congregation erupted in applause. They walked out of the church together into brilliant sunshine, people throwing rice and cheering. It felt like the beginning of something new, not just for Claire and Jake, but for the whole community. They had learned that standing together against injustice was possible, that change could happen when good people found their courage. The celebration lasted late into the evening. Martha had organized a feast at her boarding house, tables groaning under the weight of food brought by everyone in town. There was music and dancing, laughter and joy. Claire danced with her new husband, her feet barely touching the floor, her heart full to bursting. As the sun set and people began heading home, Jake and Claire stood on the porch of the boarding house, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You ready to go home?" Jake asked. Claire smiled, leaning into his solid presence. "I'm already home," she said. "I've been home since the day you decided I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," Jake replied. "I just helped you see it." They rode back to the ranch together, the gray mare carrying them both easily. The house was dark and quiet as they approached, but it felt welcoming rather than lonely. This was their home now, built on respect and partnership and genuine affection. It wasn't the life Claire had imagined when she was young and naive, marrying Vernon Morrison. It was better. It was real. Years would pass. The ranch would prosper. Children would come. 2 daughters and a son filling the house with noise and laughter. Vernon Morrison would fade into memory, a dark chapter that was over. Other women in similar situations would hear Claire's story and find the courage to leave their own abusive marriages. The town of Cottonwood Falls would develop a reputation as a place where women were respected and protected, drawing new families who wanted to build lives in a community with strong values, but all of that was in the future. On this night, Jake and Claire simply went inside their home, closed the door on the past, and began building their future together. It would have challenges, certainly. Life always did. But they would face those challenges as partners, as equals, as 2 people who had learned that survival was only the first step. True living came from choosing hope, even when hope seemed impossible. It came from people who refused to look away from suffering, who insisted that everyone deserved dignity and safety. It came from love that grew slowly, tested by hardship, and proved genuine in the testing. Claire lay in bed that night, listening to Jake's steady breathing beside her. She thought about the woman she had been, buried in the earth, certain she would die. She thought about the journey from that moment to this one, the terror and pain, but also the kindness and courage she had witnessed. She thought about the fact that she was alive and free and surrounded by love. As sleep claimed her, Claire smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to be lived fully. But tonight she was simply grateful. Grateful to have found a good man in a harsh world. Grateful that sometimes, against all odds, justice prevailed and good people won. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered across the prairie, carrying with it the promise of a new day. Inside, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances slept peacefully, their hands clasped even in sleep, their future stretching before them bright with possibility. The story that had begun with burial ended with resurrection, not just of one woman, but of an entire community's conscience. And in a small ranch house under the vast western sky, hope had won.